Okay, ladies and gentlemen, the U.S. Bureau of Economic Analysis has come out today with its gross domestic product second quarter report for 2025. This is an advanced estimate, but nonetheless, it says that in the second quarter of 2025, the U.S. increased its GDP from the preceding quarter by 3%. So, I produced a previous video wherein I predicted that by the end of this quarter, we would have two subsequent quarters of economic contraction, therefore satisfying the definition of a recession, which is 6 months in a row of declining GDP. But even though the first quarter of 2025 was indeed an economic contraction, wherein GDP decreased from the previous quarter by 0.5%. Here in this report, it is suggesting that in the second quarter, GDP increased by 3%. Now, in my previous video, I suggested right off the bat that if we see economic growth in this second quarter, then we'll know right then and there that essentially the U.S. Bureau of Economic Analysis can no longer be trusted and that Donald Trump has essentially taken over that agency as well. But let me explain. I don't want to be accused of believing whatever the Bureau of Economic Analysis says if it's something that I agree with, but if I disagree with it, then, well, they're not to be trusted. Rather, what I tend to look at is, well, what makes sense? Does this make sense? And I'm going to go through that with you right now. So as we turn to this little chart right here, we see the explanation for why GDP increased by 3%. According to the U.S. Bureau of Economic Analysis, that is almost entirely due to a decrease in imports, a massive, dramatic decrease in imports, which is somewhat believable. It's believable that imports decreased. However, this is the crux of what I have to explain to you. As I taught for 30 years, imports takes away from GDP. But what we mean by that is in the calculation of GDP, it represents a negative number. And the reason for that is because imports are mixed in with the other categories that add to GDP. So that's consumer spending, investment spending, government spending. It's mixed in there. Those are the things, along with exports, that add to GDP. The problem is when anyone is reporting on, for example, consumer spending, which is by far the largest segment of GDP. It accounts for approximately 2/3 of GDP. When we're accounting for consumer spending, we know that some of that consumer spending, in fact, a lot of it, is actually represented by imported products. And so we need to subtract the part of consumer spending that was actually imported by other countries. Because remember, at the end of the day, what we're trying to ascertain here is gross domestic product. In other words, what is the value of goods and services that were produced within the borders of a country? And so if you import something, it's not supposed to count because it wasn't produced within the borders of that country. And yet you know it's going to be added somewhere along the line to either consumer spending or investment spending or government spending. It's going to be added there. And the reason why that is because when someone like Walmart reports their total sales, they have no way of saying, well, here's the portion of our sales that was produced domestically. They just report total sales. But where we do track the information related to imports is essentially at the docks, at the loading docks, where the goods come into the country. That's where it's tracked. And so we simply subtract that total figure from everything else. The problem here is what the U.S. Bureau of Economic Analysis is suggesting is that imports went down by so much that it caused GDP to go up by 3%. But here's the problem. Imports in of themselves cannot cause GDP to go up or down. Imports are simply deducted from overall GDP. The only thing that causes GDP to go up is consumer spending, investment spending, government spending, and exports. And so, if GDP went up by 3%, something had to cause that to happen. That growth has to be found in consumer spending, in investment spending, or in government spending, or in exports. But here's the problem. Again, we take a look at this chart, and you can see, was it consumer spending? Not likely. Consumer spending only contributed to 1% of the growth in GDP. Investment spending contracted GDP dramatically by 3%. Government spending is basically flat, 0.08% of growth. That's what it's suggesting. That's basically zero. And then exports, which has a powerful ability to add to GDP, but it did not whatsoever. Exports contracted GDP by 0.19%. So remember, imports in of themselves cannot do anything to GDP. The only thing that we're trying to do with imports is subtract the impact of imports out of consumer spending, investment spending, and government spending, where we know those imports might find their way into, and then we have to essentially cancel it out from those other areas that cause economic growth. So where is the actual economic growth? Now, that's the broad strokes of my argument here. However, I'm not suggesting that the numbers don't add up. What I'm suggesting is that the stories that these numbers are telling is just unbelievable. Because somewhere along the way, something had to go up by so much that it accounted for this massive decrease in imports. Remember, if imports were nothing, if imports were zero, then quite simply our economic growth, our GDP, would consist of consumer spending, investment spending, government spending, and exports. That would be it. That would be GDP. The only thing that we have to do with imports is deduct it from consumer spending, from investment spending, and from government spending. Those are the elements that add to GDP. And yet none of those apparently are responsible for the growth. Imports in of themselves cannot independently cause GDP to go up. But apparently that's the story that's being told. All right, so what has to happen then here is that the U.S. Bureau of Economic Analysis is suggesting that the economy is going gangbusters, especially in consumer spending. So what they're saying is that in the second quarter of 2025, total GDP was $30,331 billion. It is higher than anything that we saw, not just in Q1 of this year, but in the second quarter, the third quarter, or the fourth quarter of 2024. Now, here's why this seems so silly. If you consider two things. One, under the 4 years of the Biden administration, the U.S. enjoyed 16 consecutive quarters of economic growth. So that's growth on growth on growth on growth on growth. Then as soon as Donald Trump hits the White House and has a couple of months to create the chaos that he's created, and we had the first quarter of economic contraction. Now apparently the economy is doing so great in the setting of absolute economic chaos that it has beat anything from the past 4 years. In this environment of complete and utter chaos, we've beat everything the Biden administration ever did. All right, fair enough. Let's drill down into some more detail, and then you tell me whether this is starting to sound fishy. All right, so under consumer spending, one of the categories of that are motor vehicles and parts. So that is apparently $775 billion for the second quarter alone of 2025. Now that number beats anything from Q1 of 2025, the second, third, or fourth quarter of 2024. Now you tell me, what do you think? Do you think Americans are going gangbusters over cars and car parts right now? Better than they have in recent history? I don't think so. And I think you know that as well. we see the same story under furnishings and durable household equipment, things like washing machines, refrigerators, etc. Better than anything over the past 4 quarters. Is that believable? How about non-durable goods like food and beverages? $1,522 billion, more than anything from the previous 4 quarters. And remember, I don't want to sound like a broken record, but the previous 4 quarters are sitting on top of 4 years of economic growth. So it's not that it's necessarily beating out just the first quarter of 2025, which was a low quarter. We're looking at absolute numbers here, and I'm comparing these to the past 4 quarters. And I'm telling you what the U.S. Bureau of Economic Analysis is saying is that everything under consumer spending is up. Everything. We see the same story here with household consumption expenditures for services like utilities, healthcare, transportation services, recreation services. Is everybody partying it up on recreation services? Well, according to this report, they are. $804 billion was spent in the second quarter of 2025. More than the first quarter of 2025, and that was more than the previous 3 quarters of 2024. Is that you? Are you spending all that money? Let me know. So to make a long story short, what the U.S. Bureau of Economic Analysis is telling us is that this second quarter of 2025, the second quarter of the Trump administration, is better than any quarter under the Biden administration. Yet we have all this chaos. We have migrant workers being arrested right off the job, being pulled out of farmers' fields, pulled out of factories. They're the ones doing the work to produce these goods and services. They're no longer available. Yet somehow we're managing in the United States to produce more goods and services than were produced even in the best quarter of the Biden administration. Do you believe that? So as I indicated before, exports are down. In the second quarter of 2025, they are reported as being $3,241.9 billion. But that's a little lower than Q1, but both of those numbers are apparently greater than anything in the last 3 quarters of 2024 under the Biden administration that was not so hostile towards its trading partners. So now the U.S. Bureau of Economic Analysis is telling us that this administration is exporting more goods and services than they did under the Biden administration. Do you believe that? Do you believe the U.S. is exporting more goods and services now under the Trump administration than they did at any time under the Biden administration? Is that believable to you? You know the chaos that's going on. You know the hostile relationship that Donald Trump has set up between the United States and all of America's trading partners. Yet apparently, the U.S. is selling more to the rest of the world now than they ever did. That's what we're being told. Is that believable to you? I could go on through all these numbers, but at the end of the day, what I'm saying is I don't think you can trust the numbers or the analysis that are now coming out of the U.S. Bureau of Economic Analysis. But what I think you can do is trust your own observations. Are you buying more things? Are you selling more exports? Are you serving more tourists from other countries? Is tourism up in the United States? What are your observations? What I would suggest we all need to do now is use our phones and use social media. So if you see good examples of what's going on in the U.S., good or bad, get out your phone, film it, and share it on social media. Let the government know that you can't be fooled, that you're watching and you're reporting on what you're seeing. If there's any economic growth taking place in the United States right now, if what we see in this report is true, then you should see it. It should be dramatic. You should see it all around you. Wow, look at this amazing growth. Sales are up. Tourism is up. Is that what you're seeing? So I'm suggesting to you that this report from the U.S. Bureau of Economic Analysis is completely unrealistic and should not be trusted. But if you do believe it, well, then the good news is I've got this bridge and I'm looking to sell it. Actually, I'm looking for a new buyer. I'm tired of the bridge business. I'm looking to retire. As you can see, it's a beautiful bridge. And I think you'd be very happy with it. You could make a lot of money with this bridge. And if you'd like to buy it from me, hit me up with a DM and I will send you the information to work out this deal. I think we could make a deal. So yeah, if you believe this report, I'd be very happy to sell you this big, beautiful bridge. Thanks so much.